Hi everyone, come into the room, get comfortable. We'll be ready to start in just a moment. It's good to have you all here. Give people a moment just to get in and get their audio sorted, and then we'll be good to go. I hope you've all got suitable refreshments, tea or coffee or whatever your persuasion is. Really looking forward to the session today with Louise and Sally. I'll go into more detail with that in a moment. Okay, well, I think that should be enough time. So whilst we wait for people to come into the room, just a reminder that this digital technology conference sponsored by Cognisoft is a far better and richer experience if you utilize the app. You can enter competitions, you go to exhibitor booths, you can learn lots more about organizations and people, and you can connect with people that you come across as you are going through the conference itself over the 5 days. Each day has a theme. Today's theme is coaching and support at a distance. And we're very happy to have Mesma here, and I'll come on to that in a moment. And then at 2 p.m, when we've finished with this seminar, we have our speed networking sessions. I described them earlier as being managed chaos. It is absolutely wonderful in terms of meeting new people and being in that environment to talk to people. So I encourage you massively to stick around and jump onto those at 2 p.m. It's relatively straightforward if you've downloaded the app. Loads of competitions, great prizes on offer. The photo competition is going really well. I was looking at some of the photos that have come in earlier, and it's great to see so many faces that I recognize and some that I don't. Okay, so we've now got up Louise Doyle, co-founder and chief executive of Mesma, and Sally Forsyth, who's the marketing and business development manager at Mesma, and they'll be presenting on their topic, delivering your best quality to your customers. Louise and Sally will be discussing how you can develop strategies for quality assurance and improvement to ensure that your frontline teams are fully supported to deliver the same high quality of support to your customers when you can't do it face to face. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Louise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. I was just having to scroll down the names actually and recognize some of the names. So it's lovely to see some of you again, albeit virtually, and some of you for the first time today. So in a second, I'm just going to swap over and show some slides. Sal's here in the background just in case anything happens with my Wi-Fi and to answer any questions that you might have along the way. I think I've managed to be able to see the chat on my phone at the same time as speaking to you. So I've dropped it. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining in there just to make sure I can. So I will keep an eye on that. So if I'm looking down here, it's hopefully because you fancy participating and joining in the chat as well. So bear with me just 1 second and I will get my PowerPoint slides on. Isn't it typical that the second that you want to show your slides, I can't actually get them on the screen. They were here before. There we go. Okay. Scott, let me just check that you can see that okay.
Yeah, all good.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. So this was a really, so I really love it when you kind of write things for events and things that you go to, and it makes you reflect on your own practice and what you're doing. And what this made me reflect on for today was it felt a little bit like my career is coming full circle, perhaps in a groundhog type way, because I started life managing big call centres for initially for British Airways and moving on to what is now EE. So much of our role was about how do you support and assure quality of lots and lots of people, hundreds and hundreds of staff, thousands of staff actually in one case, who are located everywhere, but actually only ever dealing with the customer on a remote basis. So, you know, in those days, you didn't even have the option of seeing anyone. It was just based on the phone. And so much of that discipline and that understanding has come with me throughout my career. And I hope that what I get across to you today, and I know some of you guys work for smaller providers and you are our heartland as a business within Mesma. So I reflected on today for me is about how I keep this simple. How I don't make quality assurance complex, how perhaps you leave here enthused for quality assurance in a way that you may not have done before, but also having had the opportunity to speak to listen into some of the other sessions, I hope I can build on what other people have said rather than overlap with what they have said. But if I'll reference them where I think it might be useful to do so, and welcome to another couple of people who I can see have just joined as well. So the aim of this session is to hopefully develop your approach, or at least give you the opportunity to reflect on quality assurance and improvement practices, which ultimately are about supporting your staff to feel fully supported. And as we know, the way in which they are having to fulfill their role is shifting somewhat, as has been the case for so many of the organisations we work with. So hopefully that's what I'm able to bring to the party today is a little bit of reflection on that. I'm actually going to go bigger picture first. I hope you're okay for me to do that and to go back to basics a little bit about when we're even talking about quality assurance and improvement, what do we mean by that? And Scott and I co-hosted a round table recently, which was about looking at a quality improvement framework within this sector. And I've chosen to share a couple of the slides that we used on that because it seemed to help to get that level. Before we start to dive a little bit more into saying and asking ourselves the question how those things may or may not have changed as a result of you working in different ways with your customer base. So I've called this opening section the bigger picture, and really what I hope I can get us to just reflect on is what exactly is it that we are trying to achieve with any quality assurance practice that we may have in place within our organisations. And again, feel free to add anything into the chat. Please don't be shy. So there might be something I say that you don't agree with, or you really do agree with, or you haven't thought about before. And I'm a great believer in the chat within Hoover being a collaborative opportunity to share ideas and experience. So I hope I'd rather we did that than you kind of just hear from me, so it becomes a bit more of a conversation. So let me share with this one with you first, and it is a question around, so when we talk about quality assurance, what exactly is the purpose of it? And I always think it can be summarized really neatly within these three boxes. And if you just look at the triangle there at the bottom, it helps us to move beyond compliance. So my simple way of putting that is compliance often says whether or not something is or is not happening, and quality is about whether or not it's happening well. And we've certainly seen a shift within some of the recent contracts in England from the Department for Work and Pensions, where there was a greater emphasis on quality, and that's really good to see. For some of you guys who have one foot in the education sector as well as employment support, you'll see the difference in that in the same way that we do, because of the nature of the beast, and that's actually in whatever country you happen to be working in. So I'll start over on the left-hand side. Quality assurance plays a key role in strategic thinking. What should our products and services look like to best achieve the desired outcomes for our customers and our funders and our regulators and all of the stakeholders that you guys are navigating? The one at the top, it plays a crucial role in driving accountability. So that accountability is at every layer within the hierarchy, within your organisation. But actually, we can take all three of these up to a macro level. So at sector level, is the sector achieving what it needs to, not just necessarily within the organisation, but we will focus on organisations today. And over on the right-hand side, and this for me is the one which is very much about linked with accountability around staff development, which is we are here, of course, to hold people to account for the role that they are here to do, but that has to be coupled with how we support them to keep getting better. So that's what we mean by capacity building. How do we help our people to keep improving and keep getting better at what they do? And that's about learning and sharing good practice, as well as identifying areas that perhaps are not working quite so well, that we might need to put some time, effort and resource in order to improve it. So hang on to those three things as we go through today, because what I'll talk about is always coming back to what's the point of quality assurance, and actually it's about these three, and we'll certainly touch heavily on accountability and capacity building today, less so on strategic thinking. I quite like this summary, so I thought I'd share it with you. So if we take those three things and we turn those into a more wordy version of it, quality assurance plays a key role for the protection of service users and other stakeholders, the overall system effectiveness, so that's within an organisation system or as the sector overall, quality improvement and the quality of individual providers, products and systems that may be within that overall space that you operate in. And the reason why I thought this one was helpful to share is sometimes the terms quality assurance and quality improvement are used interchangeably. And I don't get hung up about stuff like that. You know, I think the main thing is that what we're doing is we're saying, what is it that good looks like? Are we achieving it? And also, are we keep getting better from that point? And I'll show you a hopefully helpful diagram around that in just 1 second. So quality improvement in this context, I've talked about as a subset, if you like, of a broader quality assurance strategy. What are we achieving, but how do we continue to develop? And I thought you might find this bell curve that I often share with people hopefully quite helpful, because I think it always raises an important question, and this in some respects takes us beyond perhaps a compliance type approach as well, which is making sure that in whatever way we're operating, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's online, where is the incentive to keep improving? How do we encourage people to operate within that cycle of continuous improvement? And whether your methods are around, in my old days in old money at Orange, having a whole squad of black belt Six Sigma people, or lean principles or Kaizen or whatever it might be, actually it's still about, have we got the basics of continuous improvement in place in a simple way or in a more sophisticated way. So what this bell curve hopefully shows you is that it's really important we set the minimum standard. What is our minimum standard that we expect within our organisation? What does quality provision look like? And some of that's driven externally, perhaps from regulators or from wider sector experience. That's certainly the conversation we've been having with IEP, but also your interpretation of that. What does quality look like for you and the customers that you interact with and their various complexities? And some of you guys I know focus on customers with particularly high needs. Therefore, the quality of what that looks like might well be different. The risk if we only focus on a minimum standard is we drop people, let me try and wiggle my mouse around, just over this line. So we've got a tail end of this is where we're below standard. And if we just try and jump over the line, then what you potentially end up with is lots of provision in this space, but actually not necessarily the drive to improve. So that interaction between, are we meeting minimum standard, but actually how do we keep getting better and keep getting better? So you potentially get to the point of moving this pink line up and up and up. That what we want to be is in this space over here. So that's what I mean by the incentive to improve. Having a minimum standard in place, I'm going to come back to it in a second, is really important. And it might well be that that standard has had to shift because you're having to operate a slightly different or very different type of delivery model to engage people in a different way as an outcome or during the pandemic. But ultimately, it's still about us supporting them to continuously improve, either as individuals or our whole staffing base across the board. So let me now turn that. I said to you I'd keep it simple, so I'll give you the context stuff and then I'd turn it into my let's just keep this stuff simple kind of routine. And what we always talk about at Mesma is encouraging and supporting our clients to be constantly curious, and we build our software platform to do that, and we come and speak at stuff like this to encourage you to do that too. And we always focus on this series of 7 questions. And I thought this was a nice link actually with Mark's session earlier where he was talking about data, because he said the same thing in a slightly different way. The first thing is to determine what questions are we asking of our data. There's a great phrase which is data is a mirror, is not a mirror, it's an engine room. So what we can't do is just look at the data and come to conclusions. We have to do something with that data in order to tell the story of our customers and the story of our service users, depending on how you choose to refer to them. So number one, what questions are we asking of our data? Number two is this. So what I mean by this is whatever that interaction is with the customer, is this meeting the standards that we set for ourselves? So that comes back to the bottom of the bell curve I was showing on the last slide. Then asking the question of our data, why is this working? So it's meeting the minimum standards, but why is that happening? It's one thing for it to be a happy accident. It's another thing to do it and know how to repeat it. And that's where we get into capacity building. Why is whatever this is perhaps not working as well as it could do? Has this pattern changed over time? So the trend analysis, and why might that have happened? Is that something that we've done and we've changed, or is it something that might be being imposed upon us externally? Number six, what can we do to make it better and with what impact? And number seven, what are the barriers to making it better and what can we do about them? So a quality assurance chain, and I'm going to show you an example of that in just 1 second, kind of guides you through these seven. And I come back to that phrase I used earlier. It's not just about reflecting on whether or not something's happening. It's about, is it happening well? And if it's not, what are we going to do about it? So with that in mind, let me share with you what I hope is a simple quality assurance chain diagram. And I'd really love you to comment in the chat, if you wouldn't mind, on a question I'll ask you in a moment. So if we go over to the left-hand side of what you can see there, then our inputs into this process are the definition of our quality standards. What does good quality look like for us as a provider? The second input is how we then take that and turn that into whatever our quality assurance policy might be. And then we move into the blue one at the top. So therefore, if that's what our standards are, what are our quality KPIs or our Q KPIs for the year ahead? What does our calendar of quality assurance activities look like to check progress against those Q KPIs? We then need to undertake that range of activities in order to check our progress against them, this one up here. We're then reviewing the achievement against them to support the evaluation of quality against perhaps an externally set standard, or it might well just be your own internally set standard. We then need to identify our areas for improvement, and then how do we source solutions to support improvement, and then we're back round again. And it doesn't matter if I spend my time in employment support or in education, then I usually find that the cycle or the chain looks broadly like that because it's not a complex one. What I think is interesting is when you look at the delivery models that you guys are having to move to and adapt incredibly quickly and at pace, then understandably our focus is quite often around, we've just got to make this happen. We've got to get this in, we've got to get the customer facing service elements into this. And my experience has been that the quality assurance has kind of lagged behind that. So the quality assurance, the definition of the standards, the definition of the policy, and how you might then adapt your quality assurance methods to assure yourself and to keep improving, perhaps are still underdeveloped and need that time and space. We always call it reviewing the reviewing. So how do we review our own quality assurance practice to make sure that it is keeping up with the shift in the way that we are having to work? And the question I wanted to ask you there, if you would be interested in sharing it in the chat, and as I said, don't be shy, because we would love you to share your experiences, is which of those, does that ring true for you, I guess, is the first question, because it might not, but more so, which of these have you found that you are having to adapt or having to think through again in order to meet the requirements of supporting your frontline guys to continuously get better? Which of these have you had to change, adapt, or which of these do you know you need to adapt in order to meet those? So that's kind of my overarching question as I go through the rest of the content today, which hopefully you'll choose to reflect on a little bit with us. So with all of that in mind, what I'm going to do is focus now. I'm going to go down the funnel another layer into this orange box here. What do the quality assurance activities look like? So the methodology, let's use the posh word, the methodology that allows us to make this chain fly if we're very clear on what our quality standards look like and the quality KPIs that we are choosing to set for ourselves, because we have certainly seen some shift in that, and we have certainly seen people using our platform in different ways as a result of having to move to a more digitally focused model. So this next section I've called assuring performance and supporting team members, because the thing I always want to get across, I'm a people person and I come at quality assurance entirely from the position of how do we help people to keep getting better. If you were going to put it actually into the Daniel Pink triangle of mastery, purpose and autonomy, how do we constantly support our people to have those three things in balance: their ability to master their role, their understanding of how it aligns to the broader purpose of the organization, so that golden thread, and we give them the autonomy to act within our systems and processes that we have every day. So bear that in mind as I go through this. So let me just bring that one. Oh, that was a horrible way the diagram came up. I have no idea why that's happened. Bear with me 1 second. I'll stop that. Actually, let me just let it work through. I've never seen it do that before. Let's see what happens. It might be more of a surprise for me than it is for you. So I put 2 Greek questions on the screen. I'm hoping that it doesn't then just move on and vanish. I might take it off actually, put the other screen on so you can see it. Bear with me. I'm going to stop sharing and just drop the other one on. How slow was that? That was horrible. I promise you, it's never ever had automation on, so I don't even know where that's come from. Oh, it still wants to be there. I'm going to have another go at bringing it up. Let me share my screen and you can kind of live with me as I let it go through the automation. The best laid plans, eh? I wouldn't even know how to do that. So I've just shown it in this way so it doesn't bring up all of that stuff that it was doing before. And hopefully you can see that just as well. In fact, let me just make it a bit bigger so you can. There you go. So which of these QA activities do you use, and which of them have the most impact on your performance are the questions to consider. And then I'm going to go through them with just a bit of a digital lens on, just to share with you some experience of how people may have changed along the way. So for some of you guys who I know are smaller providers, one of the questions you always ask us is, but we just don't have the capacity to do all of this. And the thing I want to assure you is it's not about doing everything. It's about building a quality assurance model that is right for you and focusing on the things that have the most impact for you as well. That's what's most important. Which of these things can have the most impact on driving performance? And if we start up at the left-hand side, for some of you guys who come very much from an education space, then you'll be familiar with the terminology of self-assessment and improvement planning, but we certainly see it done well within the employment support space. I work with some excellent clients in employment support who adapt and have adopted a similar methodology. And the wonderful thing about self-assessment is when it's done well, and that's the key, it allows you to have a bottom-up approach to self-reflection and a top-down approach to setting quality performance indicators. It is fundamentally a collaborative tool to engage people in the process of improvement, and a really exciting one when it's done really well. And that's what that one's about. Over on the top right, I suspect you'll be familiar with this, which is the notion of observations of practice, and also the reviewing of resources. And I'll come back to that one in particular in a moment and go down another layer in the funnel. The third one is around deep dive and case study type reviews. So what I mean by that is that activity of looking at something completely in the round, taking perhaps an individual customer and looking at their full journey as a team, as a collaborative exercise to understand what is working and what isn't working and what needs to be improved. The bottom one is around the use of action learning sets or practitioner inquiries to give your teams a problem, if you like, and looking for them to solve it. And the one that you will be very familiar with is the different ways in which you are able to gather qualitative and quantitative stakeholder feedback. And every single one of these is coupled with the data, so the nuts and bolts of whatever way you are collating it. It was interesting to see how many were using Excel to do that when I was listening into Mark's session, that you are using that data to reflect deeply on what it's telling you. And that's essentially when you get into the deep dive case study type approach, as well as action learning. So let me just jog around this diagram and tell you a bit about what we have seen happen during the pandemic and where things have changed progressively. We have seen an increase in the number of our clients who are becoming more comfortable with facilitating their self-assessment and improvement planning in an online way. So them allowing for the reflective practice to be brought in, to be shared between departments, for people to see what each other are doing and to identify themes for improvement. And that's been fantastic because, of course, what that does is it removes the geographical boundaries of just working with a team in a particular area. Observation of practice, we spend a lot of time talking to people about because that has changed significantly, and I'm going to come back to it, and it'll be the last bit of the funnel. I'm going to take you a little bit further down. And coupled with that, although separately from that, I think you could argue, is around the reviewing of resources. As I think on day one of the conference, you'll have heard people talk about moving to an online training. I listened into the session from the Digital College. It is not good enough, we all know this, to simply take our material we might have delivered pedagogically in a classroom environment and move it online and think it will be okay, because it's not. So that reviewing of resources to continuously make sure they're suitable, it is of course a feature of something of a quality assurance cycle. But I'll come back to observation of practice in a short while. The deep dive and case studies, we've seen the same as with self-assessment, is that richness of pulling people together from different regions, different departments, different teams, different parts of the organization to review information and data that allows you to look at the success or not of the customer journey. And I would actually argue that the tools and techniques and that we have available to us online make that approach more beneficial than if you were doing it in a room together, because of the fact it removes the boundaries, but it allows you to focus more deeply. And that's certainly been what we have seen when we have supported clients to set that up in practice. And the same, I think, applies for action learning sets, so I won't dwell too heavily on that one. Stakeholder feedback, we are well versed in using technology to support the way we capture that. I think if there was anything I'd probably give a nod to in a quality assurance space, it would be that in employment support as a sector, and forgive me that I make a generalism because I know it won't apply to everyone, we can be quite good at capturing it, but a bit less good at using it. So it's how that feedback is used to drive improvement planning. How does it feed back into the cycle of how can we make things better? And actually that feedback covering the whole journey, not just perhaps certain pieces of that journey, because then we end up looking at things in silo, and quality assurance is about getting a really good sense of what's happening in the round. So I promise you I would take you down to the next level. So that question I asked you before actually applies to this slide as well, which is, I asked you within that value chain to reflect on how your quality assurance practices have adapted or not in order to take account of the different delivery models that you guys are now working with. And sometimes we're finding that that's coming up at the tail end because you've had to have your head so firmly into, my God, we've just got to get this thing done. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a case of making sure that it's on the radar to do something with. But the same question applies to this slide, which is, of these things, one is which of these that you do and which of them work and have the most impact, but also which of them have you had to adapt in order to think through a different way of working with your customer base. So I'm going to go into that observation bit, as I promised, a little bit more deeply, and this will be my closing input, if you like, for the session. I'm so frightened actually of doing anything with these slides now that I'm not even going to open it up. I'm just going to leave it like this so we can see it this way together. So when we think about observation, I'll share some tips with you in a moment about considerations that you need to take account of when you're observing in an online environment. I'm sure you guys will have a view on this as well. But if there's anything that I would really encourage you to think more about, it would be about the process of observation and the way that we therefore deploy it in order to coach and develop our team to be at their best. Because I think we miss a trick too often in this space to get the most out of the process. So what I've put on the screen for you is what I hope a really simple process, but one I would, if you're happy for me to do so, just spend 5 minutes or so going through and share it with you. So pre-discussion, observation, two-way dialogue. What I find is that there's an awful lot of effort placed on the one in the middle, which is what's happening during the observation. And that is often about lengthy forms, and it turns into a bit of a tick box exercise. And some of you will have heard me use the phrase before about that balance of it being perceived as a threat by staff, so it's a very parent and child relationship, as opposed to it being a supportive, challenging environment which allows me to keep getting better at what I do. So when observations are done at their best, then they encompass these three elements. The pre-discussion is the thing that stops it being parent and child. It is about you and your team members having that opportunity to agree a focus for observations, agree the desired outcome from the observation. So if I am one of your work coaches, what is it that I want to improve on? What is it I would like you as my observer to look out for in order that we can co-facilitate and co-investigate that? And also that reflecting on what are the minimum standards that we expect from this, which is a helpful place to have that conversation. The observation itself, you'll see that I've shared with you in kind of 3 question marks, and I think this starts to reflect on the nature of the way that you might be working with your customers in groups and one-to-ones now. The question about live intervention is an interesting one and probably isn't asked enough, and that's about, as an observee, would you like me as the observer ever to intervene or not? And I'll give you a really good example of where that can work really well. And that might be where you have a newer member of staff. So them knowing that you are there to support them if something doesn't quite go the way that you need it to. But those things have to be agreed. So that's about it going back into the pre-discussion. The second question, of course, that's come onto our radar is around whether or not the review could be based on a recording of something rather than a live observation. I'll come on to some considerations of that later on. And the third one, which I've just done some recent training actually with some colleagues in the employment support and education around unseen observation. So actually it sounds a ridiculous phrase, but fundamentally if you do the bit in the pink right and the bit in the green right, so the pre-discussion and the two-way dialogue, you don't actually need to be in the room. You don't even need to view a recording, because the quality of the conversation is so good and so structured that it allows you to do that without being there. And the third one around step is around the two-way dialogue. And if there were something that I think organizations can improve on, and I'm comfortable in making this generalism, it is the quality of that two-way dialogue, making the space and the time, finding the space and the time in very busy operational roles to discuss areas and focus on areas of strength, discuss areas of development and the support therefore, and the further coaching development that is needed. And sometimes that's about the timing of that feedback. Sometimes it's about trying to do too many observations. So we're doing so many observations, we're losing the thread of actually spending the time being able to focus on the depth of that observation. And that's something that I would urge you to consider. and how therefore the skills and the behaviours of both the observer and the observee might feed into that process. So if we just take the bit in the orange just briefly for a moment and we think about the key components of what we're looking for, whether it's online or whether it's face-to-face, those key components don't change. What changes, of course, the way that we need to deploy them. So at a foundation level, the engagement between two people, we know how important the relationship is, and that's as much online as it is offline. I come back to my contact center pedigree of the quality of the relationship was everything to us. However, it is a foundation layer. It is a foundation to knowledge and skill transfer, and also the quality of the feedback that's given to help the customer to move to the next stage in their journey, and where appropriate and relevant, the assessment that perhaps comes with that. And you're more likely to see that in a more formalized educational training setting, but not necessarily every time. So we're still looking for the same things, but for observations, for me, it's about that process, the quality of the pre-discussion, the observation itself, whether or not you need to be there, whether or not it needs to be done live, or whether or not it can be done as a recording, and the final step about the integrity and the quality of that conversation. And observations can play such a crucial role in that broader quality assurance cycle and chain that we talked about earlier, but they can also have the exact opposite effect if done badly. They become a box ticking exercise, they become a fear factor, they become an oh my God, rather than that opportunity to coach and develop staff. And again, the space that we're operating in, I would urge you to, with your policy in mind, think about who's doing those observations, because again, geography doesn't have to be a barrier to that. I worked with an employment support provider recently where they had matched up peers in different parts of the country to do those observations around in Scotland and in England. And there's some really exciting opportunities to really think that through. So I said I'd touch on some considerations. I'm just taking nearly to the close now from me. And those considerations in relation to observations specifically are the ones that you can see. The appropriateness and permissions of observing or recording. You can't just leap in the same way that we tell people that your call may be recorded for training purposes. But when it's observing, there are lots of other things to factor into that. Safeguarding, the impact or the how it might skew the interaction between the customer and the work coach with an observer present. So there's lots to think about then. There's no particularly one way to skin the cat, but we know that people are using observations of one-to-ones very successfully, as well as groups. And the fact it's done online gives you some different options that perhaps may not have been there so easily in an offline world. If you are doing it, then thinking about the cameras on or off. I would also argue that an observer is less intrusive online than they are when they're sat in a room in the corner with a clipboard, type approach, because you just turn your camera off. So it's much easier to not be a part of the conversation if it's part of your policy to do them. Think about the introduction of the observer role, how that is put across to the customer, if they have the opportunity, of course, for the person not to be there. The one I've just mentioned about minimising observer as a distraction, and the confidentiality of chat content. So, for example, if you're group training, people often say things in the chat that they may not want to be made available after that. They may not want their name attached to it. So you've just got to think about that as well if you're using recordings in the mix. The last thing for me to pick up on is around the what are we observing, and what I tend to find in a QA type space, whether it's online or offline, is that there's observation taking place over here in group training, possibly less so in group induction. There are observations taking place up here within one-to-one customer support. I see less interaction with employers being observed, and I often wonder why that might be, when it's our business development or employer engagement teams play such a critical role in the overall quality assurance cycle in bringing really good job opportunities to the table. So why would we not observe those interactions? This one down here is related to targeted activity. So for example, you might identify that you have a quality issue in the way that you support customers who have a physical disability. So therefore, what you want to do is focus your observations on a period of time over that. And again, for our smaller providers, that's another way of thinking about how you cut this up. It's not about trying to observe everything. It's finding where your focus needs to be, where you can have the most impact. And the last one over on the right-hand side, there's certainly some of this happens. I think it could be stronger. And again, this is in the spirit of support, which is partner, where we've got partners and subcontractor arrangements, how you facilitate a program of peer observations where everyone can learn from each other. And there are some good examples of that in the sector, but I think we could do it better collectively to keep improving on the good work that you guys do and work so incredibly hard to deliver. So let me go back to this one. I feel confident now I've got past those diagrams. I'm fascinated to know why that's happened. PowerPoint is now developing a life of its own. I'll come back to this diagram. So I hope you find this slide helpful. I try and do them visually so you can take photos and you've got them as a takeaway in thinking about this chain would have been there to an extent for all of you anyway. The question I'm posing is how much of this, if any of this, has changed as a result of the shift in your delivery models to encompass some different ways of working. My hunch is all of it is impacted in some way, and that comes back to the bits in the grey over here. What are our quality standards? What do we define good to look like? And how have we then interpreted that within our policies in order that we can make this chain work in this different way in which we are now working? A few things I'll share with you in working with us and working together because it makes sense to do it, but more, I'll keep this very brief because you can actually see this in our exhibitor room. We've got another run of the Self-Assessing Brilliantly for Employability Providers event running. We've done one with our IEP colleagues already. We'll do another one. If you would like to come along and talk more about self-assessment, we'd love to have you. We've normally done those with employability and education, but actually we thought we'd do one very specifically for you guys. We're running another effective observations session over in February, and there's an offer in our exhibitor room for anyone who has been attending. The same applies with our software platform as well. There is an offer for you. And last but not least, I hope Scott would want me to share this, is in partnership with IEP. I mentioned at the beginning that we've had a roundtable event with some amazing people and fantastic input to consider the value of a quality improvement framework for the employment support sector. And the plan is we will have a second roundtable coming up around that. I think we're aiming for December time. Scott may want to say something else about it at the end or may not. If you'd be interested in knowing more about that, just drop a note in the chat. We want as many people to be engaged in that conversation as possible. So it truly is a collaborative effort on which the IEP are so very good at instigating and developing. So I'm going to stop there because I think that's quite enough from me, frankly, and I'll hand over to you guys to see if there's any comments, questions that has come through before we close for today.
Hi Louise, yes, we've had some comments, we've had some questions with people asking each other what IAG stands for and,
Awesome.
and different things like that. So many acronyms in the employability world, isn't there?
Yeah.
We've also had some comments on how there is some fantastic, Martin has said, thank you Louise, these are really good pointers for my employability practitioner apprentices.
Fantastic.
That is fantastic. Suzanne, sorry, has had to leave us for a while, dip in and out, take a call, wants to know if the recording will be ready in the video section later today. We'll do our very best. It will be on as soon as possible, Suzanne, but possibly not by the end of today. But I'll do my best to get that up for you. But we haven't had any questions through yet. Does anyone have any questions for Louise while we have her? We're very lucky to have her here and she's always happy to be put on the spot.
I am.
Can I make a comment, Helen, while we're waiting for questions?
Yes, you can.
Responses through. What I really like about Mesma and Louise and Sally is that, in particular, Louise, she's able to put what is a really, really complex subject into something that I can understand. And for anyone that knows me, simplicity is key. So, you know, the work, as she's mentioned, that we're doing with the alongside IEP and Mesma around the round tables is just to kind of try and kind of extend that conversation to talk about what practitioners would need to do to enable quality improvement to take place and be measured within organisations, thus improving overall delivery. And I think, as Louise stated, we had a really, really great first meeting, and unanimous verdict was we definitely need something. What that is yet to be agreed. But for me, on a personal and professional point of view, I want to try and shift the dial of professional practice and thus commissioning an activity from a compliance-driven agenda, which is pretty solely compliance-driven agenda at the moment, to one of quality improvement. I think that serves participants much better, and I think it makes the job even more rewarding. And I also think that commissioners and everybody else and organisations within the frame will get a better deal from that happening. So yeah, discussions are ongoing, but it's a really exciting intervention alongside some of the other roundtables that we're doing, and I'm really hoping to get some really good key results out of that in our follow-up meeting in December. So thanks, Louise.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
Thank you, Scott.
I was just going to pick up on just a couple of comments in the chat. Martin, I think we've even talked about this before, haven't we, is the importance of everyone playing a role in quality assurance. That one of the dangers I see, and actually I see more in education than I see in employment support, so it's a slightly different issue that arises, is it becomes a bit of a siloed cottage industry, you know, that it's those people over there who audit us, rather than actually it being a shared collaborative responsibility, and one that actually has the potential, when done well, to drive innovation in practice. Who better to know how to improve your practice than the people who actually deliver it and the people who are on the receiving end of it? And QA at its best is about bringing those voices, you know, to the fore. I think the last time we may have even spoke, I mentioned that it was the point I made earlier about, you know, I've had loads of my team who are very highly trained in very complex techniques around problem solving and continuous improvement and lean and so on and so forth. But singularly, one of the best questions you can ever ask in this space is, what should we fix that gets on your nerves? And if you can get down to the nub of what gets on people's nerves, that we all just become accepting of sometimes, then I think you're a good way towards it. And again, I encourage the smaller providers not to get hung up on what sometimes feels opaque and a bit heavy-handed, as Scott said, and just keeping that focus. You know, what will make the most difference to the service that we offer, and how does our data support us understanding that? But actually, what gets on our nerves, what really gets on your goat, that every day you just put up with and you get used to and your customers get used to. You know, it could be the squeak of the door when they come in drives them nuts. It could be anything, but in the spirit of nudging quality improvement, you don't have to go set out to change the world. If you just make everything that little bit better every day, then I think we're in a really good place. Deborah, your comment around observing partners, employers, thank you for picking up on that. I think that if you can set your observation policy up well, and it's high challenge, low threat, in the words of the brilliant Mary Myatt, that opportunity for peer observation between partners has the potential to again drive innovation in a way that if we don't do that, I think we're missing a really exciting trick. And also the support that gives for the smaller partners who may well be in your supply chain. So thank you very much for picking up on that as well.
Louise, Martin did ask us when we were going to next have you on our IEP Live Learn Lunch webinar series. So Martin, I promise you, as soon as she's available and we can have her back, we'll get her scheduled for another session.
We'll get another one in. And actually, a question that would be, what do you want to talk about? So we know what we think you might want to talk about, but if you the more that you tell us, I want help with this, we're struggling with that element of QA, then we will do our best to put those things in front of you to be able to support you through those considerations.
Perfect, thank you. And that's a really good point. So, and it's probably worth mentioning to everyone that in our community board, there is a group where you can go to, and it is asking for suggestions for the Live Learn Lunch. So for those of you who would like to see Louise, please pop over there and answer that question for her. We would like Louise back to talk to us about this, and we'll get that scheduled.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. It's really good to see you all, and thank you for the invitation to come along.
Fantastic. Thank you, Louise, and I'll give you a proper thanks in just a moment. Just to mention that our seminars today are now concluded. Thank you very much to Mark from Mountain and of course, Louise and Sally here from Mesma today. But don't go anywhere. Next up at 2 o'clock, 2 p.m, we have our speed networking sessions, which are a whole lot of fun, quite frankly. And you should engage through the app, really straightforward. Turn your camera on if you like, talk if you want, get involved. Remember to go to the exhibitor booths, remember to go and post photos, get involved in the competitions, lots of prizes to be won, lots of things to do. It's all on the Hoover app. So thank you very much, Louise. Really engaging and interesting as ever. And I'll see you all at 2 o'clock.